The moment it happened, the room felt as if someone had suddenly drained all the air from it. Under the bright afternoon studio lights, in front of hundreds of laughing spectators, Sylvester Stallone slowly pushed his chair back. The movement was small, but the tension in his face made it feel enormous. Cameras continued rolling on the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live, where the host, Jimmy Kimmel, sat behind his desk trying to keep the mood playful. But something had already broken. Stallone's expression carried the weight of something far deeper than irritation. It looked like a man who had just been pushed into a painful memory he had spent years trying to bury. If you believe stories of pain can still lead to hope, compassion, and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Echo Voice, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us how human even our heroes really are. That morning had started quietly for Stallone. The sunlight over Los Angeles spilled through tall glass windows in his hotel suite, painting warm golden patterns across the carpet. It was the kind of calm morning that people in the entertainment industry rarely experienced. Outside, the city buzzed with the usual daytime rhythm, cars flowing through wide boulevards, pedestrians weaving through cafes and storefronts, the distant echo of helicopters drifting across the skyline. But inside the room, Stallone sat alone with a cup of black coffee cooling slowly in his hand. At 77 years old, the legendary actor had seen more than most people could imagine. Fame had brought him global recognition, wealth, and a legacy that stretched across generations of movie lovers. Yet behind the iconic characters and unforgettable roles lived a man shaped by struggle, rejection, and heartbreak. Long before the world knew his name, he had once been a struggling writer sleeping in cheap apartments and wondering whether anyone would ever take his dreams seriously. Those memories had never fully left him. As he watched the sunlight brighten the room, his thoughts drifted somewhere else entirely, to a small hospital on the other side of the city. It was a place he visited quietly whenever he could, far away from cameras or reporters. There was a young boy there who loved movies more than anything in the world. The boy had discovered Stallone's films during long nights in the hospital while fighting a rare illness that had already taken years of his childhood. The boy's name was Orion Vale. Orion was only 11, but life had forced him to grow up faster than most children ever should. His hospital room was filled with posters of movie heroes taped carefully to the walls. Among them, one stood out the most, a faded poster of a boxer raising his fists in triumph after a brutal fight. That poster had been Orion's symbol of hope. In his mind, the character represented something powerful, the idea that no matter how hard life knocked you down, you could always find the strength to stand back up again. Stallone had met Orion months earlier during a quiet charity visit. What began as a brief meeting had grown into something much deeper. Whenever Stallone visited Los Angeles, he tried to stop by the hospital for a few minutes, just to remind the boy that heroes were not just fictional characters on a screen. That morning, Stallone had visited Orion again before heading to the television studio. The hospital room had been filled with pale morning light filtering through white curtains. Machines hummed softly while nurses moved gently around the bed. Orion looked weaker than usual, but when he saw Stallone enter the room, a tired but genuine smile spread across his face. For a moment, the actor forgot everything else. Fame, deadlines, interviews, none of it mattered inside that small room. What mattered was the courage in the eyes of a child who refused to stop believing in tomorrow. Stallone left the hospital carrying that image with him like a fragile piece of glass. The weight of it stayed in his chest as he arrived later at the television studio, where bright lights and cheerful laughter created a completely different world. The producers greeted him enthusiastically. Assistants hurried around adjusting cameras and lighting equipment. Audience members lined up outside, excited to see a living legend appear in person. Everything moved with the fast, polished rhythm of television production. Yet beneath the surface, Stallone felt strangely distant from it all. The taping of the show began in the early afternoon. Through the high studio windows, sunlight illuminated the stage with a warm glow that made everything look almost cinematic. The crowd applauded loudly as Stallone walked out, waving politely while taking his seat across from Jimmy Kimmel. The first few minutes were exactly what everyone expected. The host joked about aging action stars and gym routines. The audience laughed, and Stallone responded with casual humor. From the outside, it looked like another successful interview filled with playful conversation. But beneath the laughter, subtle tension was beginning to grow. Jimmy Kimmel was known for his sharp comedic style, and sometimes his humor pushed boundaries in ways that surprised even seasoned guests. As the conversation continued, the questions gradually shifted from movies to more personal topics. The audience leaned forward eagerly, sensing that the interview was moving into more emotional territory. Stallone tried to stay relaxed. Yet Orion's pale face from the hospital that morning kept returning to his mind. Then came the moment that changed everything. The host made a remark intended as a joke, referencing a painful chapter from Stallone's past involving a devastating personal loss that had deeply affected his family years earlier. For the audience, it sounded like another piece of edgy humor. Laughter rippled through the studio almost automatically. But for Stallone, the joke landed like a punch to the chest. His smile faded slowly. The cameras caught the shift instantly. The actor's eyes hardened, not with anger but with something heavier, something closer to heartbreak. In that brief silence, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Even the audience could sense that the moment had crossed an invisible line. Stallone's thoughts raced backward through time. He remembered the years of struggle before success. The loneliness of being rejected again and again by Hollywood producers. The nights he spent doubting whether his dreams were foolish fantasies. And beyond all of that, the private grief he had carried silently while continuing to perform for millions of fans around the world. The memory of Orion's fragile smile earlier that day suddenly collided with the careless laughter echoing around the studio. For a moment, everything inside him snapped. Slowly, Stallone stood up. The audience initially thought it was part of the show. Maybe a dramatic punchline. Maybe a playful stunt. But the expression on his face told a completely different story. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he simply looked around the room, at the cameras, at the crowd, at the bright studio lights shining down like artificial sunlight. Then he walked away. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause that had filled the studio earlier that afternoon. Backstage, confusion spread quickly. Producers rushed through the hallways whispering urgently into headsets. Crew members exchanged worried glances. The show continued awkwardly on stage while staff tried to understand what had just happened. Stallone walked slowly through a quiet corridor lined with framed photographs from past episodes. The afternoon sunlight streamed through narrow windows, creating long shadows on the floor. For a moment, he stopped walking. His reflection stared back at him from a glass display case, an aging man who had spent decades portraying strength on screen. But real strength, he realized, was something different. It meant protecting the dignity of pain instead of allowing it to become entertainment. Outside the studio, the warm California sun greeted him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. The world moved normally around him. Cars passed. Tourists took pictures. Street musicians played guitars beneath palm trees. Life continued. And in that moment, Stallone made a decision. He returned to the hospital. When he entered Orion's room again later that afternoon, the sunlight had softened into a gentle golden glow. The boy looked surprised but happy to see him. The room felt peaceful compared to the chaos of the studio. Stallone sat beside the bed quietly, watching the sunlight stretch across the floor. Something inside him began to heal. Moments like this reminded him why he had endured everything, the struggles, the losses, the relentless spotlight of fame. Because sometimes one small act of kindness mattered more than an entire career. If this story touched your heart, please support the Cho Voice by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people can experience stories that remind us of the power of compassion. And before we reach the final moment of this story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what part of this story moved you the most. As the sun slowly drifted toward the horizon outside the hospital windows, Stallone sat quietly beside Orion, feeling a calm he had not experienced all day. The boy's small hand rested in his own, fragile but determined. In that quiet room filled with fading daylight, the actor realized something profound about the world he had spent his life navigating. Fame may create heroes on movie screens. But kindness creates heroes in real life. And sometimes the most powerful victory isn't standing under bright lights with an audience cheering. Sometimes it's simply walking away from the noise, and choosing compassion instead.